Hi, family. Welcome to another episode of Island Girl with me, your one and only. The topic for this week is self-worth, right? It's a heavy topic, it is the elephant in the room, right? It is one of those topics that we don't tend to talk about or even reflect on, right? Because it's heavy and it's so important, right? And so I'm taking it upon myself to talk about self-worth and to discuss it in as it applies to me, right? As it applies to my journey and what I learned about self-worth and how self-worth was, how it changed its definition throughout the years, right? So self-worth is defined as an individual's evaluation of their own value, right? And this is made up of their beliefs, right? Their programming, their everything, right? So when I was younger, for example, self worth was very much externally placed, right? So what I viewed myself as, right, the value I place on myself, right, was very much revolving around other people's validation, right? External validation, um, external, tangible, visible, right? Expressions of worth, right? Like grades, right? For example, titles, degrees, right? So as a little girl, right? Many of us, as a person in this society, in this capitalistic society, many of us are indoctrinated to chase the good grades, right? You chase all of this external things, right? You chase other people's validation. You chase the approval of your teachers. You chase the approval of your parents. You chase the approval of your peers, right? You chase the approval of your siblings if you have older siblings, right? So you're always placing your self worth outside of yourself, right? So you're not really sitting down and saying, hey, what do I think about this? How do I feel about this? Right. So you're pretty much indoctrinated and you're programmed to place your value, right? Your self-worth in the hands of others, right? So if they clap for me, then I did a good job. If they approve of the way that I act or my grades or how I follow the rules, then I did a good job, right? If they laugh at the jokes that I made, which could be jokes that are about myself, then I'm worthy, right? I'm good enough, right? If I get all the A's, right? If I keep chasing all the A's, I get all the good grades. I'm in, honors, junior high school, continue on that path, right? If I chase all of that, right? All the boxes, fill in the boxes that society tells you are what makes, what'll make the individual who checks off these boxes successful, right? Successful, happy, at peace, right? So you go checking off those boxes, right? You start as a child with the grades your parents, right? The approval and your parents, of your family members, of your siblings. That eventually funnels into once you finish school, right? And you are working, then you're getting the approval of your employers, right? You're getting the approval of your coworkers, right? So that chasing A's in school becomes the chasing the employee of the year or like the gratification or validation from your employers. You did the best, you did a good job, you're the hardest working employer here. Your coworkers, oh, you're always available for my needs, you're always so helpful. And then you get to a point, right? So this is everything I'm sharing is pretty much my story, right? I was the A chaser. I was the I come from a family that, like I've said before, my mom is one of eight, right? And so we were raised in a really huge family. our family, right? Our immediate family was pretty much the entire family. It wasn't just like my mom, my siblings, and my dad. It was like the entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins. We were always surrounded by the entire family. And so, as a young girl in a family like that, right, with very poor boundaries, very codependent, I was very shy, right? I was very shy. I was very introverted, still am introverted. I was afraid of rejection. I was afraid of abandonment, right? I was afraid of my own voice, right? And making people uncomfortable or people not liking me, right? And so, what happens when you're in a big family and you have all these fears, of not being good enough, of not belonging in that family, then you start shape shifting, right? You start pretty much changing your ways, right, in order to belong to the group, right? You start changing who you are, or not pretty much not rocking the boat with saying, hey, no, that I don't want to do that, or like, I don't like this, right? You go with the flow, you people please, you shape shift to belong, right? And so that's the perfect environment for this kind of stuff, where your self-worth is very much placed in the hands of others, right? And so you're here in this huge family and you want to be approved, right? You want to be approved by your cousins, all of them, right? So it's not just you want to be approved by your older sibling, you want to be approved by all of your cousins, you want to be approved by all of your aunts and your uncles. And the way that you get validation in such a huge family with poor boundaries is pretty much by being the helper, right? Being the A student, right? Always being available for people, right? For people, and helping them with whatever they needed, right? And so these are all the patterns, right? When I in 2019, when I first sat down and started reflecting on my patterns, on my coping mechanisms, on the things that I wanted to change because I didn't want to pass them down to Scarlett and Nathan, mostly Scarlett, because she's a female that will copy me, right? She will be me if I don't change these things, right? If I don't break these generational cycles. So when I started looking back at that stuff, right, I started seeing that, my self sacrificing, my people pleasing, my perfectionism, hyper independence, all the things that I spoke about in the last episode, my savior complex, right? I got that off from my mom, right? And my mom got that from her mom, and so generational, right? And so I also started seeing how my self-worth was very much placed externally, right? So I didn't know what I thought about myself. I I was always chasing to check off the boxes, right? I was always chasing that external validation. Like, hey, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing a good job? And am I a good enough mother? Am I a good enough wife? Am I a good enough employee? Am I a good enough student? Right? And so, depending on who was in front of you, in front of me, then my self-worth would change, because I was literally giving that much power to other people, right? So if somebody was to tell me, hey, you're not mothering, parenting the way that I parent, and so you're not doing that good of a job, then that's everything goes to shit, right? And so I started doing the work, right? And I started seeing, like, what are my values, right? What do I believe in? What are the things that I want to pass down to my children, right? What are the things that I stand on, right? What are the ways that I want to view myself, right? And then I started seeing that I had to start pretty much validating myself, right? Validating the things that I was doing, and no longer searching for external validation, because depending on who was sitting in front of me, I would get a different response, right? And I couldn't, my self-worth couldn't be dependent on other people, because I was giving them way too much power, right? And so back to this, right? So since we're young, we start measuring our self-worth, right, in regards to how we do in comparison to our peers, right, to our siblings, to our cousins, right. And so from a young age, we're literally abusing ourselves, right. We're like, I need to be better, I need to run this race, I need to be faster, I need to, and we start this journey on the wrong path, right. We start this journey on the I'm not good enough, right, on the scarcity, with the scarcity mindset, on the I need to fix myself, right, instead of like where I'm at now is more of the self-love, seeing myself through the self-love lens, where because I love myself, I'm going to be more graceful, give myself more grace, right, because I love myself, I'm going to eat better, because I love myself, I'm going to work out, you know more, so that I can live longer, instead of like me versus me, and me versus other people, like them, seeing myself in all the ways that I'm falling behind in comparison to others, right? And because everybody's running their own race, and it should never be, even the me versus me, it should never be me versus me. Like why am I against myself? Like why am I abusing myself? Like I realized that not too long, a few years ago, I realized that abusing myself like that, and like breaking myself down and criticizing myself in order to attain results, physical results, like in working out, and all types of results, right? Mostly physical. It was detrimental to me, like why would I beat myself up and talk to myself in a negative, critical way? Why would I do to myself what other people have done to me, right? That's terrible. And then on top of that, I had a daughter looking at me, my son too, but looking at me to see how I treat myself, how I look at myself in the mirror, how I grab, lo little chichito que uno tiene, how I pick at my face, right? So your children are watching. They're watching how you love yourself. They're watching how you give yourself grace. They're watching how you talk to yourself when you make a mistake, right? And so all of this was things that I was just being very like reflecting on, and like taking that time to finally not be distracted, right? Because up until 2018, I was just chasing, right? I was checking off the boxes. I was 2018, 2019. I was checking off the boxes, right? Chasing the grades, chasing the grades, and then chasing the jobs. So I'll start with pretty much once I started college, right? I was still Dean's List, A's, everything. And then my insecurity, right? My low self-worth, right? My low self-esteem, my low self-confidence. It it got me to the place where I didn't even apply for the nursing program in the school that I was in, right? Because in that school, Hunter College, a CUNY school, they only took about 40 students, right? They only took 40 students for the program every year. And me and my belief in myself, right? I was like, they're not going to pick me, right? So I didn't even apply. And then after that, I did psychology, but that was already like, it already had an impact on me. The fact that, I pretty much self-abandoned. I didn't stand up for myself, go for my goal, my dream, to be a nurse. And so after that, about 19, 20, I started enjoying myself. I found I started finding my comfort in dancing and partying and drinking, right? So that insecurity, that low self-esteem, and that like uncomfortableness in my own body, I started seeing how when I drank, I was able to be comfortable in social environments, whereas in other occasions, I was very uncomfortable with myself in social environments, right? And so I saw how, you know, drinking and the dancing and like, being free, being free was bringing to me a joy that chasing grades wasn't anymore, right? And I was pretty much trying to find my bliss, right? Trying to find what brought me happiness or whatever, right? And so eventually I met Bay. I had my son, right? 2010, I had Nathan. Started working as a, I was already working as a case management, right? And so once I had Nathan and he was one, I started seeing how I could do much more, right? And I had so much potential. I could very much go back to school and get my nursing degree. And I also saw how if I didn't go for nursing, I wouldn't be able to tell my son in the future to go for his dream because I didn't do it myself, right? And so I went back to school with a 1 year old, right? I got into the accelerated program of New Rochelle. I did an 18-month accelerated program, right? Double a second degree because I already had a bachelor's. So I did a second bachelor's in nursing and 18 months, right? And I worked full time, but my supervisor was very helpful. And so Monday through Thursday, I would go to school, right? In New Rochelle, no car because I didn't drive. I would troop it, take a bus, right? I would take um, the A train to 207, catch the 12 bus to the last stop, and then I would catch the New Rochelle bus, pretty much. And then I found different ways, but this was my trek, right? This is the trek that I used to do as a 24-year-old woman with a 1 year old child, right? With very little money because I was paying for school because I had already used my Pell and my student aid on my first degree, right? And so, and I couldn't get a loan because I didn't have the credit, right? And my mom wasn't here. So I had to pay for school pretty much. I got some type of a loan, like the most basic one, but I had to cough up a lot of money to finish to every semester, right? And so I was living with very little bit of money for us to eat and everything. So yeah, back to this. So I finally went back to nursing school because I I didn't do it that much for me. I did it for my son, right? Because I knew that he deserved better, right? And a $35,000 job doing psych, mental health in the streets, pretty much visiting people at their houses, which was very unsafe as a 23-year-old woman in the Bronx. I realized, that he deserved better. And because he deserved better, I went for it and I did it, right? And so I did got my nursing degree. And then eventually I got um, the staff nurse job that I always wanted once I finished. So I started working in New York Presbyterian, which is my community hospital, right? I lived like 8 blocks away, 9 blocks away, right? And it was great. I was so happy. I was so proud of myself, right? Because NYP is like the cream of the crop in New York. And NYP is seen like you get into NYP, you made it, right? And again, I was still chasing the boxes. I was still um, checking off the boxes, right? So working at NYP was like another tangible expression or like show that I was successful, right? Because I wasn't just a nurse working at any hospital. I was working at NYP, right? And then my community hospital, that's where my son was born. That's where I went when we were sick, that's where my parents took me to the dentist. So it's my community hospital. Most of the patients there are Dominican, so it was my place, right? And so what happens? I do a year there. I'm working the night shift. I have a baby, a little child, Nathan. And after about a year there, I it started it was heavy on me already. It started being heavy on me. Um Physically, I was a zombie, right? I was going against my circadian rhythm. I was working nights on a med surg floor, which was terrible. The turnover was terrible. The ratio of nurses was terrible, right? And nurses will go in there and leave all the time. It was full of new nurses. And then there was only a few like veterans there that stuck it out, right? And then I would look at them and I would look at their lives and I would see how they hardly spend time at home, right? And most of them were overbuying, or over partying if they were the younger ones, or doing all the things, right? That I was like, if I stay here long enough, I'm gonna be like them, right? And I wasn't present at home with Nathan because I was working nights, and then the nights that I wasn't working, I was sleeping because I had to, you know, catch up on my sleep. And so I did a year and change there, and then I pivoted, right? My intuition was like, you could do better. Like there's better out there. I reached out to a friend, she gave me my resume, and I pivoted and I went elsewhere, right? And even when I left that position, so many people were like, I can't believe you left Colombia, like NYP. I can't believe you left this place, like, and I was already like establishing my values and establishing that inner voice and going with my intuition, and like, yeah, I mean, it is a great hospital to work at, but if work is more important than family, right? And for me, family, the value is always family, right? Family first. Now it's me, family. But so yeah, so I went to the other place, much more flexible, working from home, able to take my son to school, pick him up from school, have food ready when he comes home, or go eat together. It was a completely different pace, and I was like, yes, this is what I deserve, right? This is it. This is what God had for me, but I had to leave that one, right? I had to pivot. I had to go the other way, the path that not a lot of people would go, because once you get into Colombia, you don't leave, right? Because it's a great hospital. And so fast track 2015, I'm working in my little at home job, chilling. I love it, freedom. And then I get pregnant with Scar 2017, I'm working at the job still, right? The same job, but the caseloads are increasing. It's becoming a little bit more hectic. So I'm like, back to chasing. So I am like, let me enroll in this master's degree, FNP, family nurse practitioner, because if I ever have to leave this job, I have a plan B, right? If it gets to the point where the cases are way too much that I can't handle it, and it's no longer like a good, home life balance, work life balance, then I'll pivot, right? I'm always ready to pivot, right? And so got back to school, went back into school for my FMP, went to Mount St. Vincent with a friend of mine, same friend that got me the job that gave my resume into the job that I was in. And yeah, I did completed my FMP, right, through COVID and all that. And even then, when I was doing my master's degree, I was I was halfway in. When I was doing the master's degree, I was already like awakening, right? I was already seeing how I was still chasing, right? I was chasing degrees, I was chasing the grades, I was chasing that job, I was chasing, chasing, chasing. And in 2017, we bought a house, remodeled it, fixed it, everything. We moved in 2018 in Jersey. And so finally, right, after pretty much, I'm almost at the top of my career, right? Master's degree FMP is the top for me. DMP is after, but it's not necessary. But anyway, so I'm at the top of my career, right? I have a house. I have two kids, a boy and a girl. I'm with the love of my life, right? And I still have this like void inside. I still have this, there's still something in me that's not completely at peace or happy or like, and so this is why I started listening to these podcasts, right? I listened to a podcast, and actually the episode that really like hooked me of that podcast was actually the self-worth episode, right? And that was the one that got me thinking about what are my patterns, what are my coping mechanisms, what are the things that I'm passing down to my kids, what are the things that my mom had that I don't want to pass on to Scarlett, right? Where is my self-worth placed? Is it external? Is it internal, right? And then what are my values? You know, why am I running this race? And then why am I like so abusive to myself? Why do I keep pushing myself past limits that like I don't even want to do anymore, right? So I literally finished my FMP and I already knew that I didn't, it wasn't something that I was like excited about anymore. So I started it and I was, I was excited. I was it was cool. I like school. I like learning. But by 2021, when I was finishing up, COVID had already happened. And I was already awakening to the medical system, right? And awakening to all the ways that is fucked. And so while I was waking up to, all of that medical system stuff, and then also doing the self love healing journey, going back, taking the trek back to, what were the experiences that broke my heart? What are the ways that I've self abandoned? What are the things that I've placed too much energy into? What are what are the ways that I've pretty much chosen to not be authentic in order to belong with people, right? What are all that stuff, right? And so when I was doing that work at the same time I was doing that work at the same time when I was finishing school. And the whole time, all I wanted to do was that work. Like, I just wanted to listen to podcasts every single day while I did my job. Like, that was all I wanted to do. I remember Bay would be like, what are you like? When you come home from work, and I'm like, oh my God, I gotta tell you about this, like Brene Brown or Oprah or all the things I was learning, because I was so passionate about that. And I didn't have the same passion for FMP, right? I didn't have the same passion for this master's degree that I was doing, because I was still matrix, right? That was still the matrix. That was still me chasing and still me like checking off boxes, right? And so as I was finishing my degree, I was writing my book, right? So the Love and Light book, Love and Light on Your Journey Inwards, that I wrote was literally captions that I would put on Instagram, right? Captions. And it was like all about what I was going through as I was doing this healing journey. It was captions about what I was feeling, what I was going through, the things I was unlearning, very vulnerable things, right? Things that people weren't talking about on Instagram, right? And so eventually, after I finished school, I was like, I'm gonna write a book. And I didn't know what I would write the book about. I was still like, I was thinking I was gonna do a memoir at the time, but I still knew that there was still too much that I wanted to accomplish. And eventually I pivoted again. And then what I did was get all my captions from Instagram. And those were the poems, those were the poems that made their way into the book, in addition to a few others. And yeah, let me see, kind of running off tangent. So, right after I do all this work, after I start doing this work, right, listening to Brene Brown, listening to podcasts, learning from their stories, seeing how their stories resonate with my story, and then I start piecing together things about myself that I didn't know, ways that I was coping in the past, um, you know, ways that I had self-abandoned, and then learning and seeing the ways that these people from the podcast had handled things, right? And then learning from them and like putting into place things that they did and things that they were using to help them, you know. And then right. And then 2020, right? In the peak of COVID, right? We're inside, and this book Untamed came out, right, by Glennon Doyle, and I was obsessed. Like, that's where I get the wild cheetah that I named Scarlet. It's from that book. I ran two book clubs with that book because it was so impactful for me. Like, I was able to see myself in her stories, right? In and the way that she does it, right? At first, she breaks the book down. I hope you guys can I can read it. I'm going into Untamed by now, but If the girls, my girls are listening to this, they're gonna know because we did it together. So I did two book clubs, one with my cousins and my sister, and the other one with my sister still and my friends, right? It was great. Two girl book clubs, two women book clubs. And so the way that Glennon Doyle breaks down the book is the first half is pretty much all the ways that we are caged as women, right? As a little girl, as a teenager, all the ways that we are caged, all the ways that we are put into a box and we're told this is how a girl and a woman behaves. This is how you have to behave in order to be accepted in this society. You know, you need to go into this box, right? And then our own moms do it to us, the women around us do it to us, right? And so the second part of the book is pretty much her running, pretty much unlocking herself from and uncaging herself, right? Untaming herself, which is Untamed, the book's name, right? And getting out of her box and then running like a wild cheetah, right? And like running to, dancing to the beat of her own drum, being who she came here to be, being the soul that she came here to be, not the fucking NPC that the world wants you to be, right? Anyways, and the woman that they try to fit, they fit you into a box to be, right? And so 2020 with that Untamed book, that was like, I started with the podcast and Brene Brown, and then with that Untamed book came out, and it was over. Like I was undoing, untaming, uncaging all the ways that I have been put into a box by my family, by everybody, by society, by school, by work. I was setting boundaries left and right. I was setting boundaries at work. Like it's unfair that literally I called my supervisor once, multiple times, but the first time that I actually like confronted a supervisor, I was like, just because I am so efficient at my job doesn't mean I need to do more work. It doesn't mean you assign me more work if we're all getting paid the same. And so yeah, I started setting boundaries with work, setting boundaries at home, setting boundaries with my family, and just protecting myself, pretty much like standing up for myself, saying when things were done that I didn't agree with. Saying no, right? Saying no was a big thing because coming from this little shy baby girl that pretty much people please, was always helping, was the savior, right? Picked up that savior complex from my mom. And when anybody had a problem, they would come to me, and I would be there trying to help them solve these problems when these people weren't ready. They weren't ready to be accountable. They weren't trying to fix their problem. They wanted you to fix their problem, right? And so that was taking time away from my family, from my children, right? And so I started saying, nope, that's not my problem. Not my monkeys, not my circus, not my circus, not my monkeys, whatever that is. And I just started changing. I started changing my ways. I started walking as the soul that I came here to be, right? I started untaming. I started following the path that felt more aligned with me, right? Not the boxes that society had tried to stick me in, and the boxes that they had told me, pretty much told us that when we check those boxes, we will be happy, we will be free, we will be at peace, right? Not those boxes, because those boxes never lead to freedom or peace. They lead to cages, they lead to matrix, right? And so I started doing that, right? I started like speaking my truth and just pretty much isolated for a long time. I stayed away from people, right? Because another thing, I started seeing that the way for me to socialize with people that I didn't have a lot in common with, or I wasn't that comfy with, was by drinking, right? And so with COVID and being inside, I started seeing, like, I was like, you know what? If I need to drink to be around those people, then that's people that I don't feel comfortable with, right? And and then I like literally stopped drinking for a long time. And I still don't drink like that because again, now I know if I need to be around you, if I need to drink in order to be around you, then I probably shouldn't be around you because my nervous system feels uncomfortable around you. And so you're probably not somebody that I need to be around. And if I need to be around you for short moments of time, I make sure that I calm my nervous system and I, self-soothe. I remove myself from conversations that I'm uncomfortable in, and a lot of times when I'm uncomfortable in certain situations, you'll find me with the kids because the kids are so free and they're so present, and they're not talking about bullshit like the news or Trump or whatever the heck is going on at the moment, right? So I'll be with the kids if I'm not comfortable in the mix. And so 2023, fast forward to 2023, I started seeing how the winters were very tough on me, right? I would fall into depression because I wasn't getting enough sun. I wasn't going out much. I would stop working out every winter, even though I would promise myself I wouldn't, right? And working out is really, really important for me. It's definitely one of my coping mechanisms, right? And so moving my energy, moving those emotions, right? And then a clean vessel is also easier for you to hear the divine, right? When you have a clean vessel, you're able to download better, right? Download the messages from God. And yeah. And so 2023, we decided that we would come over here, right? Because winters weren't good for me and I could work from here, from DR. And I feel like that was one of the first decisions that I ever made that I that was a selfish decision, right? That I actually was like, I need this for me. Like, and I definitely I spoke to Bay and I spoke to the kids, and their opinion was very important. But the driving force behind that move was definitely me and my depression in the winter and my following my bliss, right? And so I want to let, I'm not gonna leave you with this, but this is almost my end. So when you do the spiritual journey, right? And when you start, if you get out of that track, right? That one-way track that everybody's on, checking the boxes, the matrix and all that, right? And you're unsure of who you are, and you're kind of tapping into your authentic self, and you're trying to find your bliss and your joy, right? Remembering the things that you used to do as a child that brought you joy and peace and awe and that you would get lost in is literally the key to finding that, right? So for me as a child, swimming, biking, right? Playing with my cousins outside in the summer, right? Being in the sun, all of that brings me bliss, right? It still brings me bliss. So my move in 2023 was pretty much that. I was going back to that young, wild Lidamis that like to be floating and floating in the water, on the water, because floating is very much like meditating and swimming and having the sun on my back and working out in outside in the heat, like I do my steps outside. And so that decision we made in 2023 was very much an internal, following that internal compass and following my intuition and my soul and what God was trying to align me with, right? And once you align with that soul path, right? Once you're no longer listening to your ego, right? Ego and soul. Once you're no longer listening to the ego and to the programming and to what everybody else wants you to do and what other people expect from your life, when you align with the spiritual part, right? With your spiritual path, with what your soul is telling you to do, with what your intuition is asking you to do, right? You see that you're flowing, right? And like every day has its own adventures, and you start living life knowing that you're good, like you're surrender with whatever's appearing, right? You're in flow, and then you see all the ways that God and the universe rewards you, right? It rewards you for following your soul path, right? It rewards you with people like you, people that love like you. It rewards you with abundance, material abundance. It rewards you with bliss and peace and love, unconditional love, right? And Wendy, the takeaway for this, right? I'm gonna leave it like this. The takeaway with this self-worth episode would be, now that you're a parent, right? Many of you guys are parents, the ones that are watching this. Now that you're a parent, how, as you parent your child, how are you, or how should you pivot, right? How can you pivot the way that you're parenting so that your children are not seeking so much external validation, right? Can you rephrase their questions when they ask you something into, what do you think you should do? What do you want to eat, right? You could give them choices. It doesn't have to be, they can eat whatever they want. You could give them three choices. What do you want any of these? Um, when like Scarlett's playing volleyball and she's always showing us her moves, it's also about like, how do you feel about your progress in volleyball? How do you feel? Because it's almost like we go from being children to being adults, and then we go from being told how we should feel, how we should behave, looking for external validation, and then one day we're an adult, and then it's like, then we have to make the decision, and we have to, we're in charge of this now, and like, we were never given the skills. Like, we don't have the skills to make these decisions. We're always looking outside for, hey, what do you think? How should I raise my child? Do you think I should leave that job? Like, do you think he's good enough for me? Like, when does it become the time? Like, when do you become the expert in your life, right? And then when do you know more than everybody else around you who's just watching, right? When do you become the expert in your life and in the decisions that you need to make? And then when could you be good with validating yourself, right? Just doing things because you said so, because you think so, or because you set an intention for this thing, right? And you're seeing it through, or whatever it is. And how could you parent in a way that sets your kids up so that they can have more, more experience and more skills in making these decisions for themselves, and in validating themselves, right? In validating themselves, and having this internal locus of control, that's like this internal self-worth, you know them being able to be voice how proud they are of themselves, or how proud they are of how they've made their bodies look, and not having to always come to you for validation, you know and yes, when they're kids, you're their first mirror, so whatever you say to them is how they see themselves, but that there's a time when they should be able to see themselves, and then by you giving them more authority, and reminding them that they are the experts in their life, right? That they are the experts of themselves, that nobody is in their body to make these decisions for them, that if they're full, they shouldn't eat anymore because their body's telling them that they're full, and to tap into their body and what their body's telling them to do, and to not push themselves past what their body's telling them that they can do, right? Not their mind, but their body, right? Because when they push themselves too far, then they get hurt, right? And because that's how we've been indoctrinated, and how we self-abuse ourselves, pushing ourselves past what our body is telling us to do, and not giving ourselves grace, or and not resting, right? Thinking that if we rest or take a break, then we're gonna lose a race. When we have this whole life, right? We have so much time to accomplish the things we want to accomplish, right? And we're never behind, and we're never um it's never too late, right? It's never too late to do whatever your soul's calling you to do. You can literally start a new life tomorrow, right? You can literally be a new person tomorrow. It's that easy. Like, you really can. But we keep recycling this old programming, and these old these old stories that we've gotten from our families and from TV and from society, from the patriarchy, from capitalism, right? We recycle these stories and we keep living in these same loops, and then we keep creating the same reality, right? So again, we are creators, right? We are an emanation of the creator, right? And so we have creative abilities. We have very fire ass creative abilities, right? So we have the ability to create our own reality, right? So what we envision, we can manifest, right? But if the programming that you have in your mind and the stories you keep telling yourself and the ways that your family keeps speaking about you or putting your dreams down or putting you down will affect what you can envision, right? So you have to be very careful about the programming that's running in your subconscious mind and the stories that are running in your mind and the people that you surround yourself with, right? Because they're dropping things into your subconscious mind and the content that you consume, they're all that is going into your subconscious mind. And from that subconscious mind, you are creating your reality, right? You are co-creating with the universe and with God. And many times we're just like creating the same shit. You see people living the same life 30 years later. They might have a different spouse, they might have a different job, but it's the same dynamics, the same thing. And they're literally recreating that every single day. Every day they wake up with that same programming and they're recreating that loop again and again and again. Yep. All right, let me see if there's anything I'm missing. Yep, that's it. To finish off here, if you don't know, if you find yourself in the sunken place, right? If you find yourself looking for for peace or for joy or kind of lost and like you're just following this path that was set for you already, checking off the boxes like I was in the past, start thinking about the things that you like to do as a child, right? Start thinking about the things that brought you joy and peace and bliss, and start putting that, start scheduling that into your life, right? And see how it goes changing and brightening up your life, right? And that's it. Peace out. Love you guys.